So for our topic, we chose effects of methamphetamine on the brain. And this is presented by Marilyn Baston, Lindsay Locker, Brittany Reinhold, and Natalie Wagner. So why this topic? Well, according to the National Institute on Drug Abuse, they did a study in 2017, and they found out that 14.7 million people had used methamphetamine at least once. They also stated that it's one of the most commonly misused stimulant drugs in the whole world. So that really makes it significant for us. And also the average age of new users is about 23 years old. So it's affecting young people as well in a very formative time of their life. It also negatively affects individuals as well as communities and contributes to higher violent crime rates. It can also contribute to child neglect or abuse based on, if the parents are users. And people often withdraw from their support system too. So there's a social aspect as well that's negative. The damaging effects are not only on the user's physical bodies, but also mentally and interpersonally. And I have a picture down there that just talks about the long-term effects of meth use on the brain. And just a few highlights are that it can cause severe anxiety, it can cause psychosis, hallucinations, and even impaired verbal learning or reduced motor speed in users, as well as that violent behavior, which contributes to what we talked about with the higher violent crime rates.
History of methamphetamines. Forms of methamphetamines and stimulants were first seen in the United States at the turn of the century and were available for legal use and consumption. The United States saw an increase in users of methamphetamines during World War II. American fighters benefited from the drug's stimulant properties. The fighters were able to stay awake longer hours, which allowed for longer fighting times. The 1950s began to see methamphetamines prescribed for various medical conditions from depression to appetite suppression. The 1960s saw a high increase of methamphetamine use due to the drug's availability to be injected. This led to the drug being outlawed in the 1970s. This did little to slow the use of the drug and its rates of addictions. The 1980s saw an increase in the production of the crystal form of methamphetamine. It began popping up all over the country. This made this new drug more accessible and cheap, as one of its main ingredients is cough syrup. This form of methamphetamine is smoked and gives its users a more intense high, which increases its likelihood of addiction. Methamphetamines continues to this day to be used and abused. According to the National Institute on Drug Abuse, it is becoming one of the highest drugs seen in rehabilitation centers and programs, and it is the greatest threat facing communities all over the country. It is tearing families, neighborhoods, and communities apart. Effects of methamphetamines. Methamphetamine is a stimulant class of drug and is classified as a Schedule II drug in the United States because of its potential for abuse. It can be swallowed, snorted, smoked, or injected. Due to its stimulant quality, it gives its user a rush of energy and initial feeling of productivity. Along with this energy, they experience an increase in their ability to stay awake while being physically active. However, this does not last long for many users, and the need for the drug outweighs the initial feelings of energy and productivity. The reward center in the brain will need more of the drug while supplying them with less of the euphoria they once felt. Over time, its users may experience anxiety, confusion, an inability to sleep, violent behavior, psychosis that may be permanent, severe weight loss, and dental problems. Long-term effects such as itching skin until sores appear has also been noted with this drug. Methamphetamine also has an ability to affect an individual's levels of dopamine. It increases the number of transmitters that are released in the brain. This can have damaging effects on the brain's dopaminergic neurons. This damage can lead to Parkinson's disease. Parkinson's disease is thought to be a result of the degeneration of dopamine-releasing neurons in the substantia nigra area of the midbrain. To further methamphetamine's harmful effects is the fact that many people who manufacture it use chemicals that are not fit for human consumption. It has been found to contain ingredients such as Drano, lye, hull acid, and many others. This can create irreversible damage in an individual's brain and functioning.
How meth affects the brain. We feel pleasure when neurons in reward pathways release a neurotransmitter called dopamine into various brain areas. As you can see, this provides a visual so that you can see what is happening when an individual ingests meth. Dopamine in the reward centers is released into the gap or synapse between neurons, crosses to the next neuron, and binds to receptors, providing a jolt of pleasure. Methamphetamine stimulates the release of excess dopamine, heightening the feeling of pleasure. On the next slide, the topic of clinical implications of stimulant use disorder is discussed. What is stimulant use disorder? As defined in the DSM-5, stimulant use disorder is a pattern of amphetamine-type substance, cocaine, or other stimulant use leading to clinically significant impairment or distress, as manifested by at least two of the following occurring within a 12-month period. The stimulant is taken in large amounts. There is a persistent desire to use the stimulant. There is a great deal of time spent obtaining the stimulant. A craving or strong desire to use the stimulant exists. Reoccurrent use resulting in failure to fulfill major life roles. Continued stimulant use despite having social or interpersonal problems caused by the effects of the stimulant. Important life events or passions are given up or reduced due to stimulant use. Recurrent stimulant use despite being physically hazardous. Recurrent stimulant use despite knowledge of negative physical and psychological effects caused by the stimulant. Tolerance, need for increased amounts, diminished effects with continued use, and withdrawals, characteristic withdrawal syndrome for the stimulant. The stimulant or a closely related substance is taken to relieve or avoid withdrawal symptoms. DSM-5 classification, the symptoms are rated as mild, moderate, and severe. Moderate and severe have the same codes in the DSM-5. Indicators of mild use presents 2 to 3 symptoms, whereas moderate to severe use presents 4 to 5 symptoms. The symptoms associated with meth use consist of aggressiveness, alertness, anxiety, concentration, compulsive skin picking, hallucinations, increased energy, irritability, repetitive and obsessive behaviors, and paranoia. Consequences of chronically using meth include addiction, psychosis, including paranoia, hallucinations, repetitive motor activity, changes in the brain structure and function.
Treatment. Because of the chronic nature of substance use addictions, finding a modality of treatment that will bring someone into remission is incredibly challenging. It's also important to take into account the uniqueness of each individual and how treatment may look for different people. For example, some people may benefit from rehabilitation and others might not benefit as much, and they might actually experience adverse reactions to this. Takano et al. Had discussed the gap between needs in treatment and the service providers provided to users, which whether that's because logistical barriers, negative stigmatization around treatment, lack of financial backing, and counselors willing to work in the field. That being said, there is an urgency to find a method of treatment that actually sticks. While accountability and self-confrontation have proven to have immediate results, the bigger question surrounding this is what will actually work long-term and what will prevent relapse. And Takano et al. Did a study on how cognitive behavioral therapy, or CBT, has been shown to address different thought patterns around the urges and to combat some of those negative thoughts. And the results have been promising. There are medications such as methadone and Suboxone that have been debated and not entirely agreed upon in other countries, as it is still legal in some places. But the question around it is whether or not someone will become addicted to the medication that is trying to prevent them from being addicted in the first place. Now, with relapse prevention, unfortunately, because of, again, the chronic nature of meth addiction, relapse is almost inevitable, and also it is not uncommon. So that's why it's important to take prevention strategies early on when it comes to meth use, whether that's through different groups in school, educational classes, or just different ways that the community can encourage children, especially because when they're younger, they are able to take this information in a lot better. And families do play a pretty key role in prevention and intervention, as they do play such a big role in the person's life, and the family system has become an incredibly important part of therapy. But when family isn't an option, community centers are an option, and there are plenty of available places where someone can go if they are needing education. And on the relapse prevention side of it, it's really important for those who struggle with addiction to avoid places that are associated with the drug use, because those places aren't necessarily important for them to go back to, and they don't need to live with them. So they have the luxury of being able to avoid those places entirely. So that has been something that has been proven to be incredibly effective, as well as replacing the drug with something else. And just asking what specifically motivates the addict, because each client has such an individualized story. Their treatment does need to be tailored to them. And once they're able to find out what motivates the person to use, there's a lot more of a likelihood to be able to find how to ultimately help the person replace it with something healthier.
What does the Bible have to say about drug use? Scripture says, "Or do you not know that your body is a temple of the Holy Spirit within you, whom you have from God? You are not your own, for you were bought with a price, so glorify God in your body." 1 Corinthians 6:19-20. Also, be sober-minded, be watchful. Your adversary, the devil, prowls around like a roaring lion, seeking someone to devour. 1 Peter 5:8. And as a place of hope, no temptation has overtaken you that is not common to man. God is faithful, and he will not let you be tempted beyond your ability. But with the temptation, he will also provide the way of escape, that you may be able to endure it. 1 Corinthians 10:13.
So in conclusion, meth contains toxic chemicals, damages the brain, and negatively affects many aspects of a user's health. So as clinicians, when we understand meth's effects on the brain as well as effective treatment options, that's going to help aid us in providing competent care to clients that are struggling with meth use. And so here are some resources. SAMHSA is the Substance Abuse and Mental Health Services Administration, and that is their national, that number right there is their national helpline. And so when people call that hotline, it's basically an information service for any individuals and family members that are facing mental and or substance use disorders. So that includes meth as well. and they'll provide referrals to local treatment facilities as well as support groups and any community-based organizations. So that's a great resource. And also for us as practitioners, that next link is where you can go to find out practitioner training for specific training for substance use disorder, as well as they definitely have some specifics on meth and some specifics on different drugs. So that's a great way. You can find like practitioner trainings in your area. So that's a great way to deepen your knowledge in that way. And then the last one is an association for addiction professionals. And they actually offer a lot of free webinars regarding different substances, as well as trainings for substance abuse counseling. So those are, the first one is a resource for individuals and families that are struggling with substance use. And then the last two are resources that us as practitioners and clinicians can use to help our future clients.